Hello, and thank you for watching another video. So this is video number 3 in this online professional development session that's occurring here in April. And today's lesson, I'm going to get right to the lesson. This is one of my absolute most favorite comprehension lessons to do with my students. And the reason being is that it is simple, yet it makes so much sense. And it's called Getting to the Gist of what we're reading. And the gist, G-I-S-T, means what's the point? What's the main idea? What did I miss? What are the main facts of what I've just read? So this is how I do the lesson with my students. So I say to them, do you ever walk in late and everyone has been watching a TV show and it's been on for about 10 minutes and there are 45 minutes or so left to the show, so you just missed the beginning 10 minutes. So I do that all the time in my home, where I walk in late to a show and then I look at my family and I ask, what's the gist of what's been happening on this TV show? What did I miss? Or what's the gist that's been happening on this movie? Just give me a quick gist. And they don't want to retell everything because that will take 10 minutes. And they want to do a good job of telling me, however, what has happened, because they want me to be quiet. They want me to stop asking what's happened in the movie, what did I miss? So getting to the gist of it, the gist are just the most main ideas of what has happened, helps me to know what happened in the show, so then I quietly watch the rest of the show and I can jump in. So it's just like how we do our read aloud every single day, and maybe somebody was absent yesterday and we might say, okay, we'll just give the gist of that chapter that he or she missed us reading, so that they're able to join in. If they missed chapter 3, they can just join in on chapter 4 and know what it was that we read without feeling too left behind. So I want to show you how I figure out the gist, the most important things of what I've read when I'm reading Because of Winn-Dixie. And I want you to notice, it's when I get to the part of the gist, I'm not retelling everything that happened, and I'm somewhat summarizing, but a summary is so formal. A summary has to have the beginning, middle, and end of what it was that you read. The gist is that you know what happened. And the reason why this helps me as a reader is because it keeps me focused. So we've talked about that roadmap of following the directions of what we're reading. And this is that gist of using the genre to figure out what we're reading. So if I know the gist as I'm reading, I can tell it back. And sometimes that just keeps me more engaged with my reading. So the book that I'm going to read, just the beginning of it, I just want to introduce this book because if you have it, it's a great book, Because of Winn-Dixie by Kate DeCamio. This is one of my favorite books. It's realistic fiction, and it is about this little girl who comes in contact with a beautiful dog, and then it's her story with this dog that she has found. So, chapter 1. My name is India Opal Bulini, and last summer my daddy, the preacher, sent me to the store for a box of macaroni and cheese, some white rice, and 2 tomatoes, and I came back with a dog. This is what happened. I walked into the produce section of the Winn-Dixie grocery store to pick out my 2 tomatoes, and I almost bumped right into the store manager. He was standing there all red-faced, screaming and waving his arms around. "Who let a dog in here?" he kept shouting. "Who let a dirty dog in here?" At first, I didn't see a dog. There were just a lot of vegetables rolling around on the floor, tomatoes and onions and green peppers. And there was what seemed like a whole army of Winn-Dixie employees running around waving their arms just the same, the way the store manager was waving his. And then the dog came running around the corner. He was a big dog and ugly, and he looked like he was having a real good time. His tongue was hanging out and he was wagging his tail. He skidded to a stop and smiled right at me. I never before in my life had seen a dog smile, but that is what he did. He pulled back his lips and showed me all his teeth. Then he wagged his tail so hard that he knocked some oranges off a display, and they went rolling everywhere, mixing in with the tomatoes and onions and green peppers. The manager screamed, "Somebody grab that dog!" The dog went running over to the manager, wagging his tail and smiling. He stood up on his hind legs. You could tell that all he wanted to do was get face to face with the manager and thank him for the good time that he was having in the produce department. But somehow he ended up knocking the manager over, and the manager must have been having a bad day because lying there on the floor right in front of everybody, he started to cry. The dog leaned over him, real concerned, and licked his face. "Please," said the manager, "somebody call the pound." "Wait a minute," I hollered. "That's my dog. Don't you call the pound." All the Winn-Dixie employees turned around and looked at me, and I knew that I had done something big, and maybe stupid too. But I couldn't help it. I couldn't let that dog go to the pound. "Here, boy," I said. The dog stopped licking the manager's face and put his ears up in the air and looked at me like he was trying to remember where he knew me from. "Here, boy," I said again. And then I figured that the dog was probably just like everybody else in the world, and he would want to be called by a name. Only I didn't know what his name was, so I just said the first thing that came into my head. I said, "Here, Winn-Dixie." And that dog came trotting over to me just like had been doing it his whole life. The manager sat up and gave me a hard stare, like maybe I was making fun of him. "It's his name?" "It's his name," I said, "honest." The manager said, "Don't you know that you're not to bring a dog into a grocery store?" "Yes, sir," I told him. "He got in by mistake. I'm so sorry. I won't let it happen again." "Come on, Winn-Dixie," I said to the dog. I started walking, and he followed along behind me as I went out of the produce department and down the cereal aisle and past all the cashiers and out the door. Once we were safe outside, I checked him over real careful, and he didn't look that good. He was big but skinny. You could see all his ribs. And there were bald spots all over him, places where he didn't have any fur at all. Mostly he looked like a big piece of old brown carpet that had been left out in the rain. "You're a mess," I told him. "I bet you don't belong to anybody." He smiled at me. He did that thing again where he pulled back his lips and showed me his teeth. He smiled so big that it made him sneeze. It was like he was saying, "I know I'm a mess. Isn't it funny?" It's hard not to immediately fall in love with a dog who has a good sense of humor. "Come on," I told him. "Let's see what the preacher has to say about you." And the two of us, me and Winn-Dixie, started walking home. So I finished a chapter, and I could just keep reading and enjoying the story. But I think as readers, it's really important that we stop at certain points and we say to ourselves, what is the gist of what I've read? What are the main things that have just happened? It helps me to just sort of think about and make sure that I understand what's taken place in this story. So the gist of this chapter, I would say, well, there's a little girl that we meet. Her name is Opal, and she heads over to the grocery store called the Winn-Dixie to pick up some things for dinner. And we know there's someone else called the preacher, but we're not really sure who he is just yet. So she gets to Winn-Dixie, and there is chaos going on in Winn-Dixie, and she's not quite sure what's going on, but the manager's shouting, and then all the employees are shouting, and it turns out that there is this dog who is wreaking havoc in the Winn-Dixie. He's knocked over things, and there are vegetables everywhere, and so the manager is really upset, and at one point he even is knocked over by the dog, who really is friendly. And we know he's friendly because he's smiled with his teeth at the little girl. The dog even licks him, which shows a really caring animal. But the general manager of the store is going to call the pound, and we know the pound is where they come and they take the dog away, and you might never see the dog again. So the little girl just impulsively says, "That's my dog." And she knows she needs to give it a name, and it says how she says, everyone needs to be called a name. So we learn already some character traits about her, that she must be kind, thinking about that the dog needs a name. And the dog must be kind, we know, because he licked the general manager. So I'm seeing some connection there between the dog and the little girl already. And she says, Winn-Dixie, come here. And she lets everyone think that Winn-Dixie is really her dog. And the only reason why she thought of that name was because she was in the Winn-Dixie, and that's the first thing that came to mind. And right off the bat, I get a very warm feeling that this book is going to be about a friendship with the dog and Opal. So that's just the gist. It's talking about what we've read, the main points of what we've read. And that was a little long, but I think it's good for us to stop and think about what it is that we're reading, the gist of what we're reading. And the more that we teach ourselves to do this, and the more that we teach our students to do this, I believe the closer that our students will be to the text, and we call that close reading. And this is just a habit. Every time we read, that we should pause and say the gist and sort of think about it. I joke with my students, picture me, that I'm just going to keep asking you questions about what you're reading, so you might as well give me just the main points, the gist of it. And there's so many students that you can't retell everything, so I just have about 30 seconds to a minute. So tell me the gist of the last several pages that you've read. So I hope that this lesson is as powerful with your students as it is with my students. And I wish you luck with teaching your students to stop and think of the gist, the really important things that are happening in their reading every so often, and to give them chances to talk and tell about the gist of what they're reading with you and with their reading partners. So again, thank you very much for watching this video, and take care.